So 19 years ago today, on April 13th of 2004, I woke up that morning in Iraq with both of my legs, and I went to sleep that night with just one of them. Definitely not part of my life plan, not on my to-do list for the day. That's funny, I'm supposed to laugh at that. Losing a leg is probably not on anyone's to-do list, but that's kind of the beauty of life. You never really know what life is going to throw at you until it does. I knew that my chosen profession as a military officer had its risks, but you never think that something like this is going to happen to you until it does. And in a moment, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that story. But first, I want to ask all of you a question. If there was something that came into your own life that was sudden, traumatic, unexpected, how would you handle it? In essence, with COVID, we all have dealt with it, but let's put COVID aside. Do you run from it? Do you run to it? Do you tackle it head on? Maybe you even end up better on the other side. Well, I'm here to tell you that you can do just that. And today I'm going to tell you why. So I like to say that I was born a patriot, a lover of our country from a very young age. I know there are many others out here today who have served, and I thank you for your service. I realized at a young age when I saw that flag what it meant. And as I grew a little bit older, I saw military personnel. They had flag patches on their shoulder. I would see them around town. I would see them on TV. And I would look at them and realize what they were giving back to a country that I felt so proud to be a part of from a young age. And as I got a little bit older and my parents would say, "Hey, Melissa, what do you think you want to be when you grow up?" I would always say, I wanted to be in the Army. I wanted to wear that uniform and have that flag patch on my shoulder. So my story eventually led me out to the University of Colorado in Boulder, and freshman year, I saw ROTC cadets marching around campus. They had their uniform on, they had that patch on their shoulder, and you could just tell that they were that camaraderie and how much of a team that they were. And I wanted to be a part of that. So sophomore year, I was basically a recruiter's dream. I marched my way into his office. I said, "I want to join the Army. What do I do?" And he's like, "Well, first you're going to sign this stack of papers," as he hands me over a stack of papers. I sign my name, hand the papers back to him, and in turn he hands me my very first military uniform, the desert green camouflage that many of you probably think of. I went back to my dorm room. I put that uniform on, and that pride that I felt, just knowing that this is what I was supposed to do with my own life. So I don't come from a military family. My parents knew of my desire to be in the Army, but they kind of thought it was a phase I was passing through. Because to them, like, why would their youngest daughter actually, join the Army? So imagine their surprise when sophomore year of college, I dial them up and they answer the phone. I'm like, "Guess what, Mom and Dad? I'm wearing my first uniform. I signed all these papers. I'm going to be commissioned as an officer, and I'm going to be in the Army." And there's kind of this awkward pause, as parents do so well. And then my dad, having no idea what to say, blurts out, "Are you sure they allow girls in the Army?" So it was this unknown world that we were all diving into together. But of course they allow girls, and I fell in love with it. I got to wear my uniform. I got to learn battle drills. I got to learn leadership drills. I got to paint my face in mud and roll around in it. I got that camaraderie with my fellow cadets, the physical fitness we had to do, and I loved everything that was a part of it. And then senior year of college came up, and a day came up on the calendar that we'll never forget. September 11th of 2001. If you recall, it was a Tuesday. And like every other Tuesday in college, it was ROTC day, which basically meant I had my uniform on. We were going to have to do we were going to learn about military history and do some battle drill training later that day. But instead, I found myself with my fellow cadets, my fellow classmates, all wearing our uniform, sitting in a classroom as we watched the news unfold on TV as those towers fell. And it was this day that our instructor looked at all of us and he said, "Today, your lives are going to change. It's not a matter of if you're going to deploy to a war to a foreign country. It's more a matter of when. So I knew that the uniform that I was so proud to wear on American soil, that I'd probably be wearing it on foreign soil as well. But first, a few months later, I graduated. I was commissioned as a second lieutenant into the United States Army with my once very skeptical but now proud parents by my side. And I set off into the wide world of the Army. So the fateful day of April 13th, 2004, started out just like any other day over in Iraq. I woke up early. I put my uniform on, which included a bulletproof vest, a Kevlar, my weapon. We had our briefing on the day's mission, on what we were supposed to do that day. And I got into my vehicle, my Humvee, and we had been through missions like this before. The only difference on this specific day is that I didn't really have much of a job. I was doing what was called a ride-along, which meant I was in the Humvee, I was just learning the route, because the next day I was going to take over for that route. And you can see the vehicle here. It was early on in the war. We didn't have armor, we didn't have doors on a lot of our vehicles, but we had a job to do, and we did that job regardless of what we had. So on this day, our vehicle left the gate, as we had done every day in the weeks prior, driving down kind of these central Baghdad roads. About 10 minutes into the ride, there was this underpass, kind of like a bridge that you would go up under without even thinking about it. We go under this bridge, and there was just this deafening boom. There's black smoke, the smell of metal. I look up, and the windshield is crashed in. The woman in the front is yelling, IED, IED. We've hit an IED, which we all knew meant a roadside bomb. The vehicle swerved to the left. We ricocheted off of a guardrail. We swerved back to the right, and we ended up ultimately crashing into this woman's house. We had been through situations like this in training. That's what training is for. And the other 4 soldiers in the vehicle did exactly what they were supposed to do. They got out of the vehicle, they surrounded it, they pointed their weapons out to assess the situation, to see what they should do next. So I started to do just that. I took my seatbelt off, I looked over, I looked down, and I knew something was wrong. There was a lot of blood. And I called out, I'm hurt, I'm hurt. Lucky for me, there was a combat medic trained in field first aid a few vehicles back, and he heard me. He rushed up to the vehicle, he pulled me out of it, and he laid me there on the sands of Iraq. I was on my back, and at the time, I had no idea really what was happening. I was very much still awake, but there seemed to be so much commotion going on, and I couldn't figure out why. I know now that my leg was gone. It had been severed. So you can imagine the amount of blood being lost and why there was so much commotion. But nobody told me my leg was gone. I'm laying on my back, so I can't see what's happening. And it wasn't until the medic, who I thought was just kind of giving me first aid, put a tourniquet on, that I realized that it's probably not as good as I thought, because we all knew that whatever is below a tourniquet is probably no longer. And then a few days later, seeing this picture from my hospital bed, and the realization that that was my vehicle, that was my blood. There's an orange Gatorade bottle that I remember being so focused on at the time, and a picture 19 years ago today, and a picture that was once really hard to look at. But I can look at this picture now and think about how far I've come, the power of the human spirit. But it was hard to believe that from this moment, just 1 year earlier, I was at my very first duty assignment, a brand new second lieutenant, Fort Hood, Texas, part of the 1st Cavalry Division, and thrown into these roles of being put in charge of soldiers, some that were older than I was, being put in charge of millions of dollars worth of equipment as part of their transportation corps. A daunting challenge, but one that I was ready and happy to take on. And then a few months later, orders came down that the 1st Cavalry Division, so my unit, was going to be deploying in early 2004. So our green uniforms quickly transitioned to the desert color. Our vehicles went from green to the sand color. And in early March of 2004, I boarded a plane and set off to the Middle East, where I was going to be for the next year. And it's a surreal moment because you're on this plane, you have all your soldiers, your equipment on, and then you land. We landed in Kuwait, and you step off of that plane. The weight of your equipment and the heat and the magnitude of the moment hits you. You drive down these barren desert roads, you look across in the distance, and you see these little huts and realize that they are people's homes, and just how different the day-to-day life is over there. Spending a few weeks in Kuwait before making that long road trip from Kuwait up into Iraq, and you cross that border, and your heart starts to beat a little bit faster. You get to the bustling city of Baghdad, and there's just people everywhere, and you just have no idea, do they want you there, do they not, or just what is your day-to-day life going to be like? But eventually, getting to the town of Taji is what the town was called, where I settled into what was going to be my new normal for the next year. I had 2 jobs over in Iraq, and the first was my favorite because I got to be in charge of 20 men and women as a platoon leader. A lot of these soldiers, 18 years old, just out of high school, trying to find their way in the world, and they find themselves with me as their leader in this faraway land, but you become family, that camaraderie just stronger than ever. My other job was as a convoy commander. So basically, I'd be in charge of leading a whole bunch of vehicles from one point to the next, delivering various supplies. And as the commander, you're in charge of the soldiers, the route, the equipment, just kind of making sure everything goes as planned. We had been in Iraq for only 3 weeks, but I was a proud soldier. I was leading soldiers. I was carrying out missions. But you just never think that a roadside bomb is going to come across your vehicle, because things like that you always think are just going to happen to somebody else. But this time, it was me. And I was lifted from the sands of Kuwait or Iraq, put in the back of this big kind of 5-ton pickup truck, driven to the nearest aid station, where I was put on a helicopter and flown to the nearest American hospital, which happened to be right in central Baghdad. I was taken off that helicopter, rushed in a stretcher, and someone called out, "You're safe, you're in an American hospital." And I was rushed into what I was told was a life-saving surgery. I was told there was a lot of blood being lost. And it wasn't until I woke up from that surgery, I looked to the gentleman next to me and I said, "Did something happen to my leg?" I still had no idea it was gone. And that's when the surgeon, in his very blunt military way, said, it's gone. You don't have it anymore. And all these years later, I feel like what I should have said was, "Well, can you look again?" Because it seemed like surreal that in a second, an entire leg is gone. But instead, he handed me a phone and said, "Would you like to call your parents?" And dialing up my parents' number, my mom answers all excitedly. She hasn't heard from me in a few days. And I had to stop her pretty quickly. Say, "Mom, something bad happened." And that's when the surgeon took the phone to explain to my mother that I no longer had a leg. And hearing the anguish of a mother through the other end of a line is something that never gets old. You never forget that. But from this moment, I had a choice. We have a choice with everything. And I had to move on. So first I had to move on physically. So I left that Baghdad emergency room. I flew to Landstuhl, Germany, which is where all the wounded soldiers kind of stopped on their way back home. And it just so happened that my dad was on business in Vienna. My sister lived over in Europe. So the day after this life-changing injury, I had 2 immediate family members rush into my hospital room to be by my side. Talk about starting things off right, literally on the right foot. That's all I had left. That's funny also. So spending a few days in Germany in that hospital before making the long trip back to the US, back home, this time to Walter Reed Army Medical Center. And it was here where my mom met us. And my parents, once skeptical of their youngest daughter going into the military, and then proud, then having the horror of that phone call, but now strong and steadfast by my side, often reassuring each other that things were gonna be okay. And when I was able to kind of get off the medication, the pain meds a little bit, and come out of my hospital room at Walter Reed, I looked around and I saw soldiers that were missing 2, 3, 4 limbs. They had lost their eyesight. They had traumatic brain injuries. And I looked at myself and I thought, wow, I'm the lucky one. 1 leg, that was it. Not to mention my life, because too many have given and continue to give that ultimate sacrifice, and making a promise then to live my life for those who had given that sacrifice, not to let losing a leg stop me from doing anything that I wanted to do. And I did receive a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, medals that you never expect to get, but ones that are proudly displayed in my home. But what made my time even better were the friends and family that dropped everything they were doing to come to my bedside and let me know that they were there for me, regardless of what was going on in their own lives. But you can imagine it's tough, right? I was 24 years old, and in a second, my life has changed forever.